Hello, this is Jeffrey Booth for the Stories for My Lights YouTube channel, and today we are here to explore part 5 of Craig and the Magic Deck. Now, if you remember in the last part, Craig narrowly escaped from some vile creatures who were trying to attack him by making use of his magic sword, his new sword. And once he had escaped, he stumbled upon a giant underground castle carved of stone that went on as far as the eye could see. And he went through the gates and came through and found himself where we are beginning today. So as he walked through the gate, Craig was surprised to see another giant courtyard. And in this giant courtyard was another giant stone wall that went both left and right, once again, as far as the eye could see. Now, whereas the last wall had a door and gate in it that was quite obvious, this one had nothing. He looked to the left, to the right, all he saw was solid stone. He listened, he heard nothing. He could see no lights. So he decided he was just going to pick a direction and walk, because what other choice did he have? So he walked up to the wall and put his hand on it, and he noticed there was a strange humming thrumming through the stone, vibrating on his hands. He also noticed that the stone was not nearly as cold as he would have expected. It was almost as warm as a hot bath. So he decided to go to his right, and in that direction he began walking. Kept his hand on the stone and walked and walked and walked. Now, after some time, he noticed that the humming and vibrating, thrumming through the stone wall seemed to dissipate, and the stone began to get colder, feeling just like regular stone. Somehow he knew this was not the direction that he was meant to be going. So he put his hand back on the wall, turned around, and went the other way. Now slowly, he felt the stone once again warming up. He felt the vibrating and almost sound-like resonance in the stone thrumming through his fingers. And as he walked, the stone got warmer. As he walked, vibration got stronger. Until finally, up ahead, he saw a green glow. It looked as if it were emanating from the wall, but he couldn't be sure. He was very excited, so he started running towards it at top speed. He sprinted, but he noticed the light was not getting close very fast. So he realized that it was actually quite a long way away. So he walked, and then he ran, and then he walked, and then he ran, and then he walked, and then he ran. And finally, he could see where the green light was coming from. It looked as if somehow inside of the stone wall was a giant glowing green emerald. It was 3 times the height of Craig and 10 times his width. And a green glow emanated from it, but the glow didn't just provide one solid green glow. It thrummed brighter, softer, brighter, softer, brighter, softer. So Craig ran as fast as he could to the front of the stone and merely stood in front of it. It was a thing of beauty. It was perfectly cut and perfectly polished. This was an emerald that was so impossible in its beauty. He knew that either this was made with a technology that people on Earth no longer possessed, or it was made of magic, or somehow it was part of the Earth itself. He didn't know which of those were most likely, but he had, deep down in his heart, a feeling that one of those things were true. He tried to touch the emerald, but as he got close to it, he realized it was way too hot for him to touch. His hand nearly got burned just being a few inches off of its surface. So he stood back and he looked at the emerald. He didn't know what he was supposed to do with it. He looked farther down the wall, there was no more light. He knew that the other direction had nothing fruitful, so he reasoned in his mind that something must be done with this emerald. The first thing he tried to do was take out his new magic sword and whack it against the emerald. He did, but it was almost as if a force field stopped the blade from hitting it, and it bounced harmlessly off. No damage was done to the emerald or to his magic blade. Then he remembered that he, of course, had his magical deck. He got out his magic deck. He saw a card with a pillow on it, which he assumed would put something to sleep. He saw the explosion card, but he didn't want to damage such a valuable emerald. He saw another one of the safe fall feather cards. He didn't want to use that, and he flipped through the entire deck, disappointed that nothing seemed to make sense, until finally he got to the very last card, and he realized, this must be what I'm looking for, because on it, he merely saw a picture of a door made out of fire, but the door was half opened. And he knew the emerald wasn't made out of fire, but he had the feeling somewhere in his heart that this was a kind of door. So he took the card out, he gave it all of his energy, and it started to glow, and then he threw it at the emerald, and when he did, the card crashed into the emerald and turned into a twinkling cloud of hazy green dust that slowly fell to the ground and glittered. And then there was a large clanking sound, and then a grinding sound, and the emerald started moving and opening up like a door, and it revealed a giant cylindrical opening in the stone wall which Craig walked through. Once he was through the doorway, he could hear the sound of stone rubbing against stone and the grinding he had heard before, and before long the diamond was back in place and the hole in the wall was closed. He really hoped and he really prayed that he would be able to get back that way if he needed to. But he looked in front of him, and do you know what he saw again? Another wall. But this one was taller than the last. And all along the wall, he could see staircases that zigzagged up and down, up and down. Most of them stopped halfway up the wall. Some of them stopped at the bottom, looking like they had been smashed with a hammer. And so, once again, he decided he would walk right against the wall. Each staircase he saw that zigzagged up the wall, he stopped, looked, and made sure that they didn't go completely to the top. There was one that wound up to where he couldn't see, and he walked all the way up it, only to find that it was about 4 steps short from him being able to climb to the top of the wall. So once again, he walked for what felt like hours, passing staircase after staircase after staircase, all of them in various stages of decay. There was nothing here for him to do. After what seemed to be an enormous amount of time, he sat down, put his head in his hands, and he thought, there's all these stairs that are trying to go over the walls, he thought, like someone was trying to find a way over the top. But what if the way isn't over the top? What if that was them trying to circumvent the actual puzzle? So, once again, he started walking on, but this time he paid much more attention to the wall. Were there any spots where the stone looked out of place, or where there were strange imperfections marring its surface? Were there any handles, hidden buttons, levers, anything that could be of assistance to him? He walked and he couldn't see them. So finally, once again, he sat down, put his head in his hands, and eventually fell asleep for a while. When he woke up, he kept walking along the wall. He was growing hopeless. He didn't know what to do. None of the stairs were complete. Who had built so many stairs anyway? But he didn't see any imperfections on the wall. But then, as he was walking, he saw something that stood out to him. On the ground was a small stalagmite. He couldn't recall, had there been any other stalagmites within this fortress in this maze of walls? He didn't think so. Up he walked to the stalagmite and put his hand on it. It seemed to be loose. He wiggled it and jiggled it lightly with his hands. Nothing happened. Then he picked one direction and pulled on it like a lever, and it creaked and pulled down to the ground, and suddenly the ground started shaking. Motes of dust were falling from the sky, and the wall in front of him ground once more, and a door opened up to let him pass through. Before he had a chance to think about whether this was a smart idea or not, he rushed through the hole in the gate and turned around after he was through and saw the stones once again posing behind him. Craig turned around to see what was behind this giant wall, and what he saw amazed him. There were no more endless walls, but in front of him was one giant castle. Yes, it once more had an outer wall, but he could see both the beginning and the ends of this wall, and it was punctuated in the middle with a beautiful door made of gold and iron. This door also was half open. All along the upper walls of this castle stood knights in shining armor, with their swords held in front of them, blade facing upward, almost as if they were looking at the blade. But he stopped and he noticed these knights weren't moving. He didn't hear any sounds. There was no clanking of armor. There was no footsteps on the stone, no breathing, no coughing, none of the normal sounds you hear when people are out and about. He crept up to the gold and iron door and listened, but still, he heard no sounds. He walked through the door, and inside, there were stairs lining the outer walls, so that knights and defenders could get up to the castle walls to protect it. In the middle was a giant tower which was 5 stories high. He listened once more, and then he walked towards the tower. He opened the metal door and walked inside. It was dark and dingy, and he got spider webs on his face. He took out his sword and let the blue glow illuminate the room. All around there were skeletons. Some of them were holding swords. Some of them were holding their stomachs or their arms or their legs like they were hurt. Some of them didn't have heads. Some of them were missing arms and legs. This looked like in the past it had been the scene of a grisly battle. But he noticed something about the bones. As he walked closer, he saw they were too big to be bones of a human. The skulls had strange ridges, and in some spots, even spikes. There were 6 fingers on each hand, and each foot only had 3 very long pointy toes. He wondered what these creatures were, and why there were so many of them dead all over this tower. He walked up the staircase to the second level of the tower, and he saw much the same thing. Whatever had been in this tower was completely gone, aside from the bones of these creatures. He walked up to the next level, and there were no bones at all here, just an empty room. Finally, when he got to the very top level, he saw something. In the center of the room, there was a lectern, and upon that lectern was an open book, kind of like the one he had seen in the previous church. He opened the book up and he looked at it. It showed pictures of knights in stone cutting down strange green creatures, which resembled the ones who had attacked him. He looked page after page. There were many symbols he didn't understand, but when he got to the last one, he saw something that did make sense. There was a picture of a knight, like one of the ones he had seen outside manning the walls, but this one held 2 hands together in front of him, but did not have a sword in his hands. It looked like he was holding an invisible blade. The picture showed a blade being inserted into his hands, and then it showed the knights marching. Craig knew, he just knew, that if he put the blade he had in these knights' hands, the knights would come to life. But what he didn't know was if he should. Were these knights good or evil? Would they protect him or hurt him? Would they go to the surface and cause problems and attack his friends or his family? He didn't know. He took a quick look through the book once again to make sure there was nothing else for him to learn. Given that he didn't read the language and didn't have any more cards that would be applicable to it, he walked back down out of the tower and climbed up onto the outer walls where all the knights were. And lo and behold, standing on top of the wall above where the gold and iron door or gate was a knight, his hands held together in front of him, but holding no blade. Craig looked at the knight. He decided that he was not going to bring this creature to life because it was too risky. He didn't know what would happen. And then, completely out of nowhere, was the loudest boom Craig had ever heard. It sounded like an asteroid smashing into the earth, a car exploding like a giant hammer smashing a skyscraper to the ground. And then, in front of him from where those giant walls were, was dust, fire, flame, and rubble shot every which way. Craig ducked down behind the crenellated wall, covering his head, as stones flew every which way. Once the stones stopped falling and the dust settled, Craig peeked his head over the ledge of the wall, and he saw, in the giant stone wall that previously had seemed impenetrable to him, was a giant hole. And through that hole were green creatures, like the ones he had fought. There wasn't 1 or 2. There was 50, 100, maybe more, and they were continuing to pour through the wall and charge towards the castle. He knew that he was in trouble, and so he knew he didn't have a choice. He took his sword and he put it inside of the knight's hands. Almost like magic, the stone or iron of the knight's hands clenched across the blade. And then the knight began glowing. First his feet, and then his legs, and then his chest and his arms and his head had a blue aura about them. And then there was a popping sound, and the entire knight's body became blue. He looked around and said, "What is your command, master?" And Craig said, "Who's your master?" And the knight said, "You are my master. Issue me a command." And Craig said, "Go down to the golden door and stop those green creatures from getting through." "Rise, my knights!" the knight yelled out, and from his mouth came blue energy that snaked and swirled around until it got to all of the other knights. And they too started to glow blue. And they too started moving. And then, with the thunderous sound of steel clamping on stone, they ran down the stairs and manned the gold and iron gate and prepared for battle. It didn't take long for them to prepare for battle. You see, for the green creatures were already coming through. Now these ones seemed faster and stronger. They had blades, and many of them wore an armor that looked to be dark black, like that of a roly-poly or a beetle shell. 3 of the green creatures descended on one of the knights, and surprisingly, they were able to knock its sword out of its hands, hack its arms and legs off, chop its head off, and it fell to the ground, now nothing but a series of inanimate metal objects. But the other knights dove into action. They twirled and they swirled, they darted and they pierced. They chopped down lizard man after lizard man until the creatures were fighting for their lives. At this point, the battle seemed rather even. For every knight that fell, a lizard fell. And then Craig knew he had to help. He looked in his deck of cards and he found one that showed a sword, but it looked like it was a sword made of fire. He took it into his hand and he sent all of his energy and he just willed it to work. And then from that card came a glowing blade of flame. He held it in his hand. The blade shimmered and swirled and he could feel the heat radiating off of it, but somehow his hand didn't burn. And he ran down into battle. He found where a knight was engaged with one of the green goblin lizard creatures and slashed its arms off. The blade cut through its arm like a knife through warm butter. The creature shrieked and ran away. He found another knight who was getting hacked and his helmet was dented up and one of his arms was missing. He dove, did a roll, came up and slashed at the leg of one of the green creatures, who shrieked once more and started crawling away out of the gate. The battle went on like this for many minutes. Craig lost track of time. Each moment was a moment of survival where he could do nothing but think about protecting the knights who were protecting him and keeping himself alive. But just like that, the last green creature ran out of the gate and was gone. Craig looked around. There were only 5 of his knights left standing, including the original one he had summoned. There were hundreds of the green, strange creatures lying all over the ground. Craig walked outside the gate and his knights followed. The green creatures seemed to be retreating past the walls. But just then, he heard something. The sound of stomping feet. He heard a crashing sound, and a boulder or chunk of stone came from the direction of all the walls, flew just over their heads and smashed into the castle behind him. He heard it again, and more boulders became flying. And before long, he heard the walls crumbling, one after another. One giant stone foot stepped over the wall, took its back leg and kicked the wall, and launched a barrage of debris and stone at Craig and his knights. They ducked down and hit the ground and got ready for the battle of their lives. That battle will take place in the next episode of Craig and the Magic Deck. Alden, I want you to know I love you very, very much, and I hope you're having an excellent day and having so much fun. You're my best friend, and I will always love you.